The morning sun of the triple star system poured through the massive windows of the Galactic Combat Academy. The light was strange to human eyes, too orange, too bright, and somehow wrong, but had grown used to it after 3 years at this place. She had grown used to many things that felt wrong. The Academy sat on a space station orbiting a dead world. Students came here from 100 different planets. They came to learn how to fight, how to survive, and how to become warriors worthy of serving the Galactic Council. It was the greatest honor any species could receive, to send their young to this place. Was the only human. She sat in the back row of the classroom, her small frame almost invisible among the larger alien bodies around her. To her left sat a tall being with blue skin and 4 arms. His people, they were known for their strength and their pride. They looked down on most other species. They looked down on humans most of all. To her right sat a creature named Bora. She was from a race called the who had soft fur and gentle eyes. Bora was kind too, but even she kept her distance. Being friends with a human was not good for one's reputation at the academy. The door at the front of the room slid open with a soft hiss. Instructor walked in. Was old. His scales had turned from bright green to a dull over his many years of life. He moved slowly, but his eyes were sharp. He had seen 1,000 students pass through these halls. He had trained warriors who now commanded fleets across the galaxy. When he spoke, everyone listened. "Today," said, his voice rough like stones grinding together, "you will begin your final examination." A murmur ran through the class. Final examination. These words carried weight. The final exam determined everything: who would graduate, who would be sent home in shame, and who would rise to glory. Raised one clawed hand, and the room fell silent. "You have spent 3 years learning to use the weapons of the galaxy," he continued. "Plasma rifles, energy blades, sonic cannons. You have learned well, but weapons can be taken from you. Technology can fail. Power cells run dry." He walked slowly across the front of the room, his tail dragging behind him. A true warrior does not depend on what is given to them. A true warrior creates. A true warrior adapts. A true warrior survives. He stopped and turned to face the class. "Your examination is this. You will forge a blade. You have access to the station's metallurgy laboratories. You have access to rare metals from across the galaxy. You have 3 days to create your weapon. On the 4th day, we travel to the jungle moon of 7. There, you will use your blade to survive for 1 full cycle." The students began to whisper excitedly. The metallurgy labs were legendary. They contained metals that could cut through starship hulls. They had forges that burned hotter than most suns. With these tools, a skilled student could create a masterpiece. Leaned forward, his 4 arms crossed over his chest. "This will be easy," he said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "My people have been forging blades for 10,000 years. I will create something beautiful." Other students nodded and made similar boasts. They were known as the greatest weaponsmiths in the galaxy. But other species had their own traditions too. The examination seemed designed for them to show off their culture's proud histories. Said nothing. She stared at her desk, her mind racing. Humans had no great tradition of weapon forging. On Earth, they had made swords and spears, yes, but compared to the plasma-forged blades of the crystal-edge weapons of the, human craftsmanship seemed primitive. Had never worked in a forge in her life. She had grown up in a small village on Earth, far from any city, far from any technology. "You may begin," said. "The laboratories are open, good luck." The students rushed from their seats. They pushed toward the door, eager to claim the best forging stations, the rarest metals. Shoved past without looking at her. Other students did the same. Within moments, the classroom was nearly empty. Remained in her seat. Bora paused at the door and looked back. "Are you coming?" she asked. Shook her head slowly. "In a moment." Bora hesitated, then nodded and left. She did not offer to wait. Alone in the classroom, finally stood. She walked not toward the door but toward the windows. She looked out at the stars, at the distant planets, at the endless black void of space. She thought about home. Her village had been poor. They had no advanced technology, no fancy weapons. When she was young, her grandmother had taught her how to survive with nothing, how to find food in the forest, how to make tools from stones and sticks, how to turn bones into needles and knives. A blade is not about the metal, her grandmother had once said. A blade is about the one who holds it. A blade is about need. Closed her eyes and remembered. When she opened them, she knew what she had to do. She left the classroom and walked through the station's halls. But she did not go toward the metallurgy labs where the other students were fighting over forging stations. Instead, she went down, toward the lower levels, toward the places no one visited. The station's waste processing center was dark and smelled terrible. Massive machines hummed as they broke down garbage from across the academy. Food scraps, broken equipment, and other refuse piled in great heaps, waiting to be recycled. And there, in one corner, found what she was looking for. Bones. The academy's kitchens served meat from creatures across the galaxy. The bones were thrown away, considered worthless garbage, but knew better. She knelt down and began to search through the pile. Most bones were too small, too weak, or too damaged, but then her fingers closed around something solid. It was the femur of a beast, a massive creature from a heavy-gravity world. The bone was thick, dense, and hard as steel, pulled it free from the garbage and held it up to the dim light. "Yes," she whispered, "this will do." She tucked the bone under her arm and made her way back up through the station. She passed other students in the hallways. Some were carrying gleaming pieces of metal. Others were discussing their designs, their plans for magnificent weapons. None of them noticed the human girl with the dirty bone. Returned to her small quarters, a tiny room barely large enough for a bed and a desk. She sat on the floor with the bone in her lap. From beneath her bed, she pulled out a small kit. Inside were simple tools, rough stones, strips of leather, and a small knife her grandmother had given her before she left Earth. These were not the advanced tools of the metallurgy lab. These were the tools of her ancestors. She began to work. First, she scraped away the remaining meat and tissue from the bone. Then she began to shape it, using the rough stones to grind down the edges. The work was slow. It was hard, but had patience. As she worked, she thought about the other students. She thought about who was probably forging a beautiful four-bladed sword. She thought about Bora, who might be crafting something elegant from crystal. She thought about all the species of the galaxy and their proud traditions. And she thought about humans. Humans were new to the galaxy. They had only made contact with other species 50 years ago. To everyone else, humans were primitives, clever perhaps, but weak and unimportant. The fact that had been accepted to the academy at all was seen as a joke by many, a curiosity, an experiment. She had spent 3 years proving herself, 3 years of being laughed at, 3 years of being ignored, pushed aside, and looked down upon. She had passed every test through hard work and determination, not through natural talent or advanced technology. Now at the end, she would show them what a human could do. The bone began to take shape under her hands. It would not be a fancy weapon. It would not glow or hum with power, but it would be sharp, it would be strong, and it would be hers. Worked through the night. Outside her window, the triple suns set and rose again. She did not sleep, she did not eat, she only worked. And she smiled. The metallurgy laboratory was the pride of the Galactic Combat Academy. It stretched across an entire level of the station, filled with forges that burned with plasma fire and machines that could shape any metal in the galaxy. The walls were lined with samples of rare materials, steel, crystal, titanium, and 100 others. Each one was worth more than most starships. For 3 days, The students had worked here without rest. Stood at the central forge, the largest and hottest in the laboratory. His 4 arms moved in perfect coordination as he hammered a glowing piece of blue metal. Sparks flew with each strike. The other students watched with admiration. He was creating something magnificent. "It will be a quad blade," announced loudly, making sure everyone could hear. 4 edges, each one sharper than the last. When I swing it, the air itself will scream. The students around him nodded and made sounds of approval. They were the masters of weapon craft. No one doubted that would create the finest blade in the class. Nearby, Bora worked quietly at a smaller forge. Her soft fur was covered in sweat, but her gentle eyes remained focused. She was crafting a crystal blade in the tradition of her people, thin, elegant, and beautiful. It would not be as strong as weapon, but it would be a work of art. Other students filled the laboratory, each one working on their own creation. The air was thick with heat and the sound of hammers striking metal. Everyone was busy. Everyone was focused. No one noticed that was not there. On the second day, finally asked the question that others had been thinking. "Where is the human?" he said, looking around the laboratory. "Has she given up already?" A few students laughed, others shrugged. No one seemed to care. "Perhaps she went home," one of the students said. "Humans do not belong here anyway." "She probably does not even know how to use a forge," another added. "Her species still plays with fire and sharp rocks." More laughter filled the room. Bora remained silent. She kept her eyes on her work, but her ears flattened against her head, a sign of discomfort among her people. She did not join in the mockery, but she did not defend either. On the third day, the final day before the examination, finally appeared. She walked into the metallurgy laboratory with calm, steady steps. Her clothes were dirty. Her hands were rough and scratched. She carried something wrapped in a piece of cloth. The room fell silent as she entered. Turned from his forge and looked at her with all 4 of his eyes. "So the human finally shows herself," he said. "Have you come to admire our work?" Did not answer. She walked to an empty table at the back of the laboratory and set down her bundle. The other students gathered around, curious despite themselves. What had the human been doing for 3 days? Where had she been working? "Unwrap the cloth." For a long moment, no one spoke. They stared at what lay on the table, trying to understand what they were seeing. It was a bone. A large bone, curved and smooth, with one end sharpened to a brutal point. The surface had been polished until it gleamed like ivory. Simple leather strips were wrapped around the handle. There was no metal, no crystal, no glowing edges or humming power cells. It was just a bone. Was the first to laugh. It started as a small sound, a chuckle deep in his throat. Then it grew louder and louder until his whole body shook with amusement. Other students joined him. The laughter spread through the laboratory like a wave. "This," managed to say between laughs, "this is your weapon, a bone. Did you find it in the garbage?" More laughter. Someone made a joke about humans being little more than animals. Another said that should just go back to her cave on Earth. Stood still, her face showed no emotion. She waited for the laughter to fade. "It is bone," she said simply, "from a beast." "We can see what it is," said, still grinning. "The question is why? Why would anyone bring a bone to a blade examination? You are supposed to forge a weapon, human. Forge. Do you know what that word means?" "I know what it means," replied calmly. "But the instructor said we must create a blade to survive. He did not say it must be made of metal." This made laugh even harder. "Survive? You think you can survive on the jungle moon with a bone? The creatures there have armor as thick as starship hulls. Your little bone will shatter the moment you try to use it." He held up his own weapon, the quad blade he had been forging for 3 days. It gleamed with blue light, 4 razor-sharp edges arranged in a beautiful cross pattern. The metal hummed with contained energy. "This is a weapon," said proudly. This is what will help me survive, not some garbage from the waste processor. Other students showed their weapons too: crystal blades, metal swords, energy-edged spears. Each one was beautiful, impressive, and clearly superior to simple bone. Looked at each weapon carefully. Then she picked up her bone blade and weighed it in her hand. "We will see," she said quietly. Bora stepped forward, her gentle eyes filled with worry. She said softly, so others could not hear, "Perhaps you should ask instructor for more time. Surely he would understand. You could use the forge now and create something better before." "This is what I will use," interrupted. Her voice was not angry, but it was firm. "This is enough." Bora opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. She did not understand. None of them did. That night the students rested before the examination. Most slept poorly, nervous about what awaited them on the jungle moon. Boasted loudly in the common room, showing off his weapon to anyone who would watch. Other students practiced their forms, swinging their blades through the air. Sat alone in her quarters, holding her bone blade. She ran her fingers along its smooth surface, feeling every curve and edge. She had worked on it for 3 days without rest. Every inch of it was familiar to her now. She knew its weight, its balance, its strength. She knew exactly what it could do. The other students did not understand. They thought she was stupid, primitive, pathetic. They thought she had failed before the examination even began. But knew something they did not. She knew what survival really meant. On Earth, in her grandmother's village, there had been no forges or advanced metals. There had been no technology at all, yet her people had survived for thousands of years. They had hunted great beasts with weapons made from stone and bone. They had crossed deserts and mountains and frozen wastelands with nothing but their will to live. The other students had learned about survival from books and simulations. They had practiced in safe training rooms with safety nets and emergency protocols. They had never truly faced death with nothing but their own skill to protect them. When she was 12 years old, she had been lost in the forest for 3 days. She had no food, no water, no tools. A great storm had come, and she had sheltered in a cave, eating bugs and drinking rainwater. When a wild beast had found her, she had killed it with a sharpened stick. She still remembered the feeling of the stick piercing the beast's eye. She still remembered the warm blood on her hands. She still remembered the taste of its meat as she cooked it over a small fire. That was survival, not forging pretty blades in a comfortable laboratory, not showing off to classmates. True survival was ugly and desperate and brutal. Looked at her bone blade. It was not beautiful, it would not impress anyone, but it was real, it was honest, and it would work. The next morning, the students gathered in the transport bay. A large shuttle waited to take them to the jungle moon. Instructor stood at the entrance, checking each student's weapon as they boarded. When approached, she held up her bone blade. Looked at it for a long moment. His old, wise eyes studied every detail, the shape, the edge, the leather wrapping. He said nothing about it being made of bone. He did not laugh or mock her. Instead, he simply nodded. "Interesting choice," he said quietly. Then even quieter, so only she could hear, "Your grandmother would be proud." Froze. How did he know about her grandmother? How did he know about anything? But had already turned away, checking the next student's weapon. Boarded the shuttle in silence. She found a seat in the back, away from the other students. Was already boasting about how many creatures he would kill. Others were making plans to work together, to form teams for protection. No one asked to join them. She sat alone, holding her bone blade, and watched the stars pass by outside the window. The jungle moon grew larger and larger until it filled the entire view. It was a green world, covered in thick vegetation. Even from space, could see the massive trees, the winding rivers, and the dark shadows that moved through the forest. Soon she would be down there. Soon the examination would begin. And soon they would all learn what survival really meant. The shuttle landed in a small clearing, surrounded by trees taller than any building on Earth. Their trunks were as wide as houses, and their branches blocked out most of the sky. Strange sounds filled the air, clicks and howls and screams from creatures hidden in the shadows. Stepped off the shuttle and felt the ground beneath her feet. It was soft and wet, covered in moss and fallen leaves. The air was thick and hot, heavy with moisture. Insects buzzed around her head, drawn by her body heat. This was the jungle moon of 7, one of the most dangerous places in the galaxy. Instructor stood at the edge of the clearing, his old scales looking almost in the dim light that filtered through the trees. The students gathered around him, their newly forged weapons held tight in their hands. "The rules are simple," said. "Survive for 1 full cycle, that is 24 standard hours. When the time is up, return to this clearing. The shuttle will be waiting." He paused and looked at each student in turn. "You may work together or alone. You may hunt for food or stay hidden. You may use any strategy you wish. The only rule is this: survive." Stepped forward, his quad blade gleaming in the dim light. "What about the creatures here? What should we expect?" Smiled, showing rows of old, worn teeth. "That is for you to discover. This is not a training exercise. This is real. Some of you may be injured. Some of you may not return at all. That is the nature of survival." A wave of unease passed through the students. This was not what they had expected. In training, there had always been safety measures, emergency buttons, instructors ready to step in if things went wrong. Here, there was nothing. "Your time begins now," said. Then he walked back to the shuttle and the door closed behind him. For a moment, no one moved. The students looked at each other, uncertainty on their faces. The sounds of the jungle seemed louder now, more threatening. Was the first to act. "With me," he commanded. The other students, 4 of them, immediately moved to his side. "We will establish a base camp and take shifts watching for threats. With our strength and our weapons, nothing will challenge us." Other groups began to form. They gathered together, their crystal blades catching what little light remained. A group of students, tall, thin beings with 4 legs, decided to climb into the trees and stay above the ground. Soon the clearing was empty except for. She had not moved since leaving the shuttle. She stood still, her bone blade at her side, and watched the other students disappear into the jungle. None of them had asked her to join. None of them had even looked at her. Good, she thought, that made things simpler. She waited until she could no longer hear the other students. Then she began to move. The first thing she did was study her surroundings. The trees here were massive, yes, but they had low branches that could be climbed. The ground was soft, which meant it would hold tracks. The air was humid, which meant water was nearby. She found a small stream within minutes. It was narrow and shallow, but the water was clear. She knelt down and drank carefully, testing the taste before swallowing. It was clean enough. Next, she looked for shelter. Not a cave. Caves meant other creatures might already be inside. Instead, she found a hollow space between 2 fallen trees, covered by thick vegetation. It was small and hidden, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. She marked the location in her mind and continued exploring. As the hours passed, began to understand the jungle. She learned which plants were safe to touch and which caused painful burns. She found the paths that animals used, worn into the ground by countless feet. She discovered the nests of small creatures and the dens of larger ones. And she found the bones. They were scattered throughout the jungle, bones of creatures that had died, picked clean by scavengers. Some were small, from animals no bigger than her hand. Others were massive, from beasts larger than shuttles. Studied them carefully. She could tell a lot from bones, how big the creature was, how it moved, how dangerous it might be. Then she heard the screams. They came from somewhere to the north, cutting through the constant sounds of the jungle. They were high and desperate, the screams of someone in pain. hesitated for only a moment, then she began to run. She moved through the jungle silently, avoiding the open paths and staying in the shadows. Her grandmother had taught her how to move without being seen, how to step without making sound. These skills came back to her now as naturally as breathing. She found them in a small clearing. It was a group of students, Bora and two others. They were surrounded by creatures unlike anything had seen before. The beasts were large, as big as ground vehicles, with armored bodies covered in thick scales. Their mouths were filled with rows of sharp teeth, and their claws left deep gouges in the ground with every step. There were 5 of them. They were trapped against a wall of rock, their crystal blades raised but shaking. One of the students was already injured. Blood, bright purple, the color of blood, poured from a wound on her leg. She could not stand. Bora stood in front of her, trying to protect her, but her blade seemed so small against the massive creatures. As watched, one of the beasts lunged forward. Bora swung her crystal blade, and it struck the creature's armored head. The blade shattered. Crystal fragments flew through the air like rain. The beautiful weapon, 3 days of careful work, broke apart in an instant. Bora stumbled backward, staring at the useless handle in her hand. The beast roared in triumph. Did not think, she simply moved. She burst from the shadows and threw herself at the nearest creature. Her bone blade found the soft spot beneath its jaw, a gap in the armor she had noticed while studying the bones earlier. The blade sank deep, and the creature screamed. It was not a fatal wound, but it was enough. The beast pulled back, confused and in pain. The other creatures turned toward, their attention drawn by this new threat. She had seconds before they attacked. "Run," she shouted to the helper. "Run, follow the stream south." Bora hesitated, still shocked by what had happened to her weapon. The other uninjured grabbed the wounded student and began to drag her toward the edge of the clearing. "Go," shouted again. This time Bora moved. She ran after her classmates, leaving alone with the creatures. There were still 4 of them. 4 massive, armored beasts with teeth and claws and terrible strength. And had a bone blade. She smiled. The first beast lunged, dodged to the side, letting it pass by her. As it went past, she struck at the back of its leg where the armor was thin over the joint. The creature stumbled, its leg giving way beneath it. The second beast was faster. Its claws raked across her arm, drawing blood, red human blood, so different from the purple of the. Pain exploded through her body, but she did not stop. She could not stop. She rolled beneath the third beast's attack and came up behind it. Her blade found another weak point, the base of the tail, where nerves bundled together. The creature howled and spun in a circle, trying to reach her. The fourth beast was the. It waited, watching her movements, learning her patterns. When it finally attacked, it was precise and deadly. Barely escaped. The creature's teeth missed her head by inches. She felt the hot breath on her face, smelled the rot of old meat in its mouth. She was bleeding, she was tired, she was only human. But she would not die here. She remembered her grandmother's words. When you face a greater enemy, do not fight their fight. Make them fight yours. Turned and ran. The creatures followed, crashing through the jungle behind her. They were faster than her on open ground, but she was not running on open ground. She was running through the thick vegetation, between the massive tree roots, through spaces too small for the armored beasts. She led them toward the stream she had found earlier, toward the muddy banks and the deep, soft ground. The first creature to reach the mud slowed immediately. Its heavy body sank into the soft earth. Its legs struggled for purchase. It roared in frustration as it tried to pull itself free. The others followed, too focused on the chase to notice the trap. Soon, all 4 creatures were stuck in the mud, thrashing and screaming but unable to move. Stood on solid ground at the edge of the stream, watching them struggle. She was bleeding, her arm throbbed with pain, but she was alive. She turned and walked away, leaving the creatures to their fate. She had to find the students and make sure they were safe. She had to find shelter and treat her wound. The jungle was still dangerous. The night was still young. But had survived. She would keep surviving. Found the students huddled beside the stream, just where she had told them to go. Bora was trying to bandage her wounded friend's leg, but her hands were shaking too badly to tie the cloth properly. The other sat nearby, staring at nothing, still in shock from what had happened. They looked up when approached. Fear flashed across their faces. For a moment, they did not recognize her in the darkness. "It is me," said quietly. "The creatures are stuck in the mud. They will not follow." Bora's eyes widened. "How? Those beasts were enormous. They had armor. My blade broke against them like it was nothing." Did not answer. She knelt beside the injured and examined the wound. It was deep but clean. No poison, no infection yet. With proper treatment she would survive. "Give me your blade handle," said to Bora. Bora handed it over, confused. Some of the crystal remained attached to the handle, sharp fragments that had not broken away completely. Used these fragments to cut strips of cloth from her own clothes. She cleaned the wound with water from the stream, then bandaged it tightly. The injured winced in pain but did not cry out. "Can she walk?" Bora asked. "Not far," admitted. "We need to find shelter. There are more creatures in this jungle and they hunt at night." She led them through the darkness, moving slowly because of the injured student. Twice, they had to stop and hide when large shapes moved past in the shadows. Kept her bone blade ready, but the creatures did not notice them. Finally, they reached the hollow between the fallen trees that had found earlier. It was small, but all four of them could fit inside if they pressed close together. "We will wait here until morning," said. "Take turns sleeping. I will watch first." Bora sat down beside her, while the other two curled up together, exhausted. "Why did you save us?" Bora asked quietly. Did not look at her. "You needed help." "We have not been kind to you," Bora said. Her gentle eyes were filled with shame. "We laughed at your weapon. We ignored you. We left you alone in the clearing." "I know." "Then why?" Was silent for a long moment. She looked out at the jungle, at the shadows moving between the trees. "On Earth," she finally said, "my grandmother told me stories about our ancestors. They lived in small groups, just a few families together. The world was dangerous. There were great beasts, terrible weather, not enough food. Alone, no one could survive, but together they protected each other." She touched the bone blade at her side. "Humans are weak," she continued. "We have no armor, no claws, no special abilities. We cannot see in the dark or run faster than predators, but we have survived for millions of years because we help each other. We share food. We share shelter. We share knowledge. That is our strength." Bora was quiet, taking in her words. "I do not save you because you were kind to me," said. "I save you because that is what survival means. Not just for me, for everyone." Before Bora could respond, a sound came from deeper in the jungle. It was a scream, not an animal scream, but the scream of a person. Stood immediately. She recognized the voice. It was. She moved without thinking, slipping out of the shelter and into the darkness. Behind her, she heard Bora calling her name, but she did not stop. She ran toward the screams. The camp was not far, perhaps half a kilometer through the jungle. Covered the distance quickly, her feet finding the solid ground even in the darkness. Her arms still throbbed with pain from her earlier wound, but she ignored it. She found the camp in ruins. They had built a strong position, just as had planned. They had used their great strength to pile rocks and fallen logs into a defensive wall. They had set up a fire in the center to keep away the creatures of the night. But something had broken through. Bodies lay scattered across the ground. Some were students, their blue skin torn and bloody. Others were creatures, the same armored beasts that had attacked but larger, much larger. In the center of the camp stood alone. His quad blade was broken. Only one of the 4 edges remained, and even that was cracked and dull. His 4 arms hung at his sides, 2 of them clearly injured. Blood dripped from a deep wound on his chest. 3 creatures surrounded him. They moved slowly, circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. They knew he was weak. They knew he could not fight much longer. Saw at the edge of the camp. For a moment, his eyes widened with something that might have been hope. Then his face hardened. "Go away, human," he said, his voice weak but still proud. "I do not need your help." "You will die," replied calmly. "Then I will die with honor. A warrior does not accept help from lesser species." One of the creatures lunged, tried to block with his broken blade, but his injured arms could not move fast enough. The creature's claws raked across his back, and he fell to his knees. Did not wait for permission. She charged into the camp, her bone blade raised. The creatures turned toward her, surprised by this new threat. She was small, weak, nothing compared to the they had been fighting. But she was fast. Her blade found the first creature's eye. It screamed and stumbled backward, blinded. Before the others could react, was already moving, ducking under claws and teeth, striking at every weak point she could find. She had studied these creatures. She knew where their armor was thin. She knew where their nerves were bundled. She knew how they moved, how they attacked, how they thought. They did not know her at all. The second creature fell when she cut the tendons in its legs. It collapsed to the ground, unable to stand. The third tried to flee but caught it before it could escape. Her blade pierced the base of its skull, and it died instantly. Silence fell over the camp. Stood in the center, breathing hard. Blood covered her hands, some of it hers, most of it belonging to the creatures. Her arms screamed with pain. Her whole body ached. But she was alive, and so was. They was staring at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It was not anger or pride or contempt. It was something else entirely. "How?" he whispered. "How did you do that?" Walked over to him and held out her hand. "Can you stand?" He looked at her hand for a long moment. Among his people, accepting help was a sign of weakness. It meant admitting that you could not survive on your own. It was shameful. Slowly, hesitantly, took her hand. She helped him to his feet. He was heavy, much heavier than her, but she managed. "We need to move," she said. "More creatures will come. They can smell blood." The others said, "My friends, are they?" Looked at the bodies around the camp. She counted quickly. 2 are alive, just unconscious. We can carry them. His face crumbled. He had entered the jungle with 4 companions. Now only 2 remained. "I thought we were ready," he said, his voice broken. "We had the best weapons, the strongest warriors. I thought nothing could touch us." "Weapons are tools," replied. "They do not make you strong, you make yourself strong." She bent down and lifted one of the unconscious over her shoulder. The student was 3 times her size, but had carried heavier burdens. Her grandmother had made sure of that. "Take the other one," she said to. "We have to go." Obeyed without argument. He lifted his remaining companion with his 2 uninjured arms and followed into the darkness. They walked in silence. The jungle seemed quieter now, as if even the creatures could sense that something had changed. The night was half over. Dawn would come soon. "I was wrong about you," said finally. "Did not turn around, I know. My people have forged blades for 10,000 years. We believe that the quality of the weapon shows the quality of the warrior. A beautiful blade means a worthy soul. And an ugly bone means nothing." Was quiet for a moment. "I thought so, I was wrong." They continued walking. The trees began to thin as they approached the area where had left the students. "What is it like?" asked suddenly, "being human?" Considered the question. "It is hard," she admitted. "We are not strong or fast or special. We have no natural weapons, no armor. Other species look at us and see nothing remarkable. But you survived tonight. You did what none of us could do. Smiled, though could not see it in the darkness. My grandmother used to say that humans are like water, she said. We are soft and weak. We flow around obstacles instead of breaking through them, but given enough time, water can wear down mountains. Water can carve canyons through solid rock. Water is patient. Water adapts. Water survives. She ducked under a low branch and continued walking. That is what it means to be human. The dawn came slowly to the jungle moon. First, the darkness began to fade, turning from black to deep blue. Then the first rays of sunlight crept through the gaps in the massive trees, painting everything in shades of gold and green. Had not slept all night. She sat at the entrance of the shelter, watching over her strange group of survivors. Behind her, the students were still asleep, curled together for warmth. Sat against a tree nearby, his eyes open but unfocused, lost in thoughts she could not guess. The two others surviving lay on beds of soft leaves, still unconscious but breathing steadily. They had made it through the night. That was something. But the examination was not over yet. They still had hours left before the shuttle would return, and the jungle was still dangerous, even in daylight. We should move, said quietly. Return to the clearing, wait for the shuttle there. Stirred and looked at her. His face was different now. The pride and contempt that had always filled his expression were gone. In their place was something tired and humble. Can the injured ones walk? He asked. We will help them. It took time to wake everyone and get them ready to move. The injured could walk now, though slowly. Her leg was stiff, but the bleeding had stopped. The two unconscious had finally woken up, confused and frightened but alive. Bora helped her wounded friend stand. How far is the clearing? She asked. Perhaps 2 hours at this pace, estimated. We should be careful. The creatures are less active in daylight, but they do not disappear completely. They began to walk. Led the way, her bone blade ready in her hand. The weapon was stained with dried blood now, but the edge was still sharp. Behind her came the, supporting each other, and the other brought up the rear, watching for danger. It was a strange group, a human leading aliens through a deadly jungle. If anyone at the academy had predicted this scene, they would have been laughed at. But no one was laughing now. They moved in silence, focused on putting one foot in front of the other. The jungle was quieter during the day, but there were still sounds rustling in the bushes, calls from unseen birds, the distant splash of something large moving through water. Halfway to the clearing, they found others. It was a group of students, the tall, four-legged beings who had planned to stay in the trees. But they were not in the trees now. They were huddled on the ground, surrounded by the remains of their broken weapons. Their leader, a young named, looked up as approached. His eyes were dull with exhaustion and fear. The creatures came from above, he said, his voice empty. We thought we were safe in the trees. We were wrong. Counted quickly. 5 had entered the jungle. Only 3 remained. Can you walk? She asked. Nodded slowly. We can walk, but we have no weapons, no way to defend ourselves. Stay with us, said. We will protect you. Stepped forward. 2 days ago, he would have laughed at the weak. He would have told them they deserved to die for their failure. But now he simply nodded. Stay close, he said. We move together. The group continued, larger now. 10 survivors from 3 different species, all following a human girl through the jungle. They were close to the clearing when they heard the roar. It came from somewhere ahead of them, deep and powerful, shaking the trees themselves. Birds exploded from the branches, fleeing in every direction. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Everyone froze. What was that? Bora whispered. Did not answer. She was staring at the trees ahead, her mind racing. Then she saw it. The creature emerged from the jungle like a nightmare come to life. It was massive, 10 times the size of the armored beasts they had fought before. Its body was covered in thick plates of bone, natural armor that no weapon could pierce. Its mouth was filled with teeth as long as swords. Its eyes burned with ancient intelligence. This was not a mindless predator. This was something else entirely. Alpha breathed. It is an alpha, the ruler of this jungle. Had read about alphas in her studies. They were rare, appearing only on the most dangerous worlds. They controlled the other creatures, commanded them like an army. Killing an alpha was considered one of the greatest feats a warrior could achieve. And they had nothing to fight it with. "We cannot run," said quietly. "It is faster than us. We cannot hide. It has already seen us. We cannot fight. Nothing we have can hurt it." "Then what do we do?" asked, his voice trembling. Looked at the alpha. It was watching them, curious about these small creatures that had wandered into its territory. It was not attacking yet. It was waiting to see what they would do. She thought about everything her grandmother had taught her. She thought about survival. She thought about what it meant to be human. And then she understood. "We do not fight it," she said. "We show it that we are not worth fighting." She walked forward toward the alpha. Bora shouted, "What are you doing?" Did not stop. She walked slowly, her bone blade held at her side but not raised. She kept her eyes on the creature, watching its every movement. The alpha tilted its massive head, curious. It could crush her with a single step. It could swallow her whole without effort. But it did not attack. It watched. Stopped 10 meters from the creature. She looked up at its enormous face and slowly, deliberately, lowered her bone blade to the ground. She knelt. The alpha watched her, its ancient eyes unreadable. For a long moment nothing happened. Then slowly the creature turned away. It moved back into the jungle, its massive body disappearing among the trees. The ground stopped shaking. The jungle fell silent. It was gone. Stood and picked up her blade. Her hands were shaking but her face was calm. She turned back to the group. "It was not hungry," she said simply. "It was protecting its territory. We showed it we meant no threat. It let us pass." No one spoke. They stared at her with expressions of awe and disbelief. "Come," said, "the clearing is close." They reached the clearing just as the shuttle landed. Instructor stood at the entrance, his old eyes taking in the group of battered students. More survivors trickled in over the next hour. In total, only 23 of the 40 students who had entered the jungle returned. The rest were dead or lost, claimed by the moon's dangers. But's group, 10 students from 4 different species, had all survived. The ride back to the academy was quiet. The students sat in their seats, too exhausted to speak. Many of them had lost friends. Many had seen things they would never forget. When they arrived at the station, instructor called an assembly. The surviving students gathered in the main hall, along with teachers and administrators from across the academy. Everyone wanted to see what had happened on the jungle moon. Stood at the front of the hall. In his old, clawed hand, he held a simple object. It was bone blade. "I have been teaching at this academy for 60 years, said, his rough voice carrying across the silent room. "I have seen warriors from 100 species. I have seen plasma swords and crystal blades and weapons that could destroy starships. I thought I understood what it meant to be a warrior." He held up the bone blade. "I was wrong." He looked at who stood at the edge of the crowd. Her arm was bandaged. Her clothes were torn and bloody, but she stood straight, her eyes clear. "This blade killed more creatures than any other weapon in the examination," continued. "It saved more lives. It led survivors through danger, and it is made of garbage." A murmur ran through the crowd. The students who had not been to the jungle looked confused, unable to understand what they were hearing. "Humans do not forge blades," said quietly. "They forge survival. They take whatever they have, bone, stone, wood, nothing at all, and they make it enough. They do not fight the way we fight. They do not think the way we think. They adapt. They overcome. They survive." He looked around the hall at all the students, all the teachers, All the powerful beings who had spent their lives believing they were superior to the small, weak humans of Earth. For 10,000 years, they have been called the greatest warriors in the galaxy, said. I think we may have been wrong about that. He walked over to and handed her the bone blade. You have passed the examination, he said. You have earned your place among us, more than earned it. Took the blade. It felt familiar in her hand, like an extension of her own body. Around her, the other students began to applaud. First the ones who had survived with her, Bora, and the others. Then more and more, until the entire hall was filled with the sound. Stood still, holding her bone blade, and let the moment wash over her. She thought about her grandmother, back on Earth, in the small village where had grown up. She thought about the stories of their ancestors, the hunters and gatherers who had survived against impossible odds. She thought about what it meant to be human. Small, weak, nothing special. But stubborn, clever, impossible to kill. That night, alone in her quarters, sat by the window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, billions of kilometers away, was a small blue planet called Earth, her home. She would return someday. She would tell her grandmother about everything that had happened, about the forge examination and the bone blade and the jungle moon, about the friends she had made and the lives she had saved. But not yet. She still had so much to learn, so much to prove. Not to the other students, they had seen what she could do, but to herself, to the galaxy, to everyone who had ever looked at a human and seen nothing worth remembering. Smiled and touched the bone blade at her side. The galaxy had not known what humans were capable of. Now they were beginning to learn. And this was only the beginning.